Well, hello, La Paloma South. I hope that you are all doing really well. This is Jessica Mikowski, and I'm glad to be back with you for this webinar. And today we are really going to be talking about prioritizing your standards. And this is going to be with the thought of heading forward towards AZ Merit. With the weeks that you have left, how are we prioritizing the standards? What are we going after? Where is our reteach? And for many of you, your Beyond Textbooks year-long plan has actually run out of standards at this point. You're probably through your content for the first time. And so now we need to spiral back, but we don't just start from the beginning and go again. We really need to think about what are those standards that we want to be working with. So let's get started. Today we are going to approach this prioritizing your standards kind of in a three-prong approach. The first thing that we're going to talk about today is the AZ Merit Blueprint. And you may or may not know this, but they have just recently released a new blueprint based on the 2016 standards. So you may remember once Diane Douglas took office, she went and took the Arizona State Standards, our version of the Common Core, and she made some adjustments to that while she was in office. And so now the blueprint represents those changes in 2016. And so it looks a little bit different than when I showed you all last time I was down there. And I really want to make sure we just spend some time thinking about the amount of time you're spending in your classrooms on different standards. The next thing that we're going to look at is your assessment technology, and so your formative and summative assessments and benchmarks using your Galileo data. And then we're going to talk about classroom application. That'll be our last kind of what are you going to do in your classroom with this. So let's just take a moment and I want you to think about why standards exist. Because I think that if we're going to continue to drive and align ourselves to the standards, and we're going to spend all this time really thinking about how can we get our students to standards mastery, it's good to remember that when we were originally implementing standards in this state and across the country, people were really fighting for this, for equality in educational experiences, so that all students would have the ability to have the same quality education. And I know that so many of you teachers teach because you believe in that equality through education. Next is, we really wanted to be able to compete in the global market. As U.S. students continue to come up through the ranks, they are going to need to be more and more knowledgeable in the areas of technology and in their communication in order to be able to compete. And as well, standards are supposed to be helpful to teachers as a guideline, a roadmap. They should be helping direct our instruction on a daily basis so that we make sure that we are kind of sticking with where everyone is going. So just a reminder of why standards exist. You may have additional things that you want to add to this section, and if you're watching this webinar with your collaborative team or with your grade level team, it's great for you to pause this video now and discuss why you believe standards exist and what are some other benefits that I haven't mentioned in this slide. All right, here are the new blueprints. So I just grabbed the ELA blueprints to show you so that you can kind of see what they are looking like. So the top part of the blueprint, that is for grades 3 through 5. And a lot of this looks the same. I actually think there is one error in the way that they printed this, so I just want to show this to you really quick. Hopefully you guys can see my arrow coming over here. So the reading informational text, this is the minimum is 26% and the max is 22, but I think they've inadvertently inverted those numbers. I think we should put 22 and 26 there. ILD has reached out to AD to let them know that there's this error, and so we're waiting to hear back from them. But here are the big things that have happened. These yellow rows are all going to be your major headings. And so now we know that listening comprehension falls underneath informational text. and reading for informational text standards fall underneath informational text. And so while this breaks it down further of where your points might be allocated within this, it used to be that listening comprehension was its own separate category worth about the same, 0 to 13%. And that listening comprehension, at least in my mind, could have applied to literature or informational text based on the way that it was written previously. As well, there has been a shift with making sure that language is settled underneath the writing and language category. They've grouped them together. That's a little bit different than what we saw before. Although the writing percentage, min and max have stayed about the same. If I'm recalling correctly, I do believe the previous one settled at 17. So this means a slight uptick for us in the lower grades potentially. So when we look at this and we're thinking about our 3rd through 5th grade, we can see that none of our maximums are that much larger than any of the other ones. And so we're kind of taking what we know we need to be teaching, breaking it into these buckets and thinking, okay, there is nothing that is so much more important than something else that I really, really need to focus on it. But as we head into our 6th through 8th grade, what you're going to see is that there is a difference between literature and informational text. And this actually gets even stronger in the high school. High school's AZ Merit Blueprint, the informational text is a much larger percentage and literature continues to be a smaller percentage. What I do like about the new way that they have written out the AZ Merit Blueprint is by lumping language underneath with writing, it increases the value of writing. And I think what has probably happened over the last couple of years is that we have devalued writing, seeing it as only a line item indicator between 13 and, like I said previously, I think 17%. People were not really focusing a lot on writing. And so one thing for you to think about next year, because I know many people are in writing units right now. This is pretty much how ELA has been working. They work through all of their standards, and then at the end they do their big writing units. One thing for you to consider next year is really hitting home and breaking apart large essays starting at the very beginning of the year, knowing that you're going to need to concentrate half of the grade that you give students on their writing on their use of language and the correct vocabulary, right? You're going to incorporate these language standards in there as well. So how are we going to use this today? Well, once we get into your data collection and what data you have, you might find out, oh man, my students are knocking it out of the park on most of the literature standards. They're just doing a really great job. And you're thinking, you know what, I think I'm just going to reteach the one literature standard they don't have. But then you come and you find out, man, they don't really have anything, any strong scores in informational text. I want you to come here and remind yourself, look, informational text is important. And if we think about prioritizing standards and what we need them to know in the next grade level, as they continue to move up, the informational text pieces become more important to them every single year. And so really want to guide you back to informational text. This does not have to be done in the ELA classroom only. At this point, if we have low ELA scores, everybody should be reading informational text. Technology can be reading informational text. PE can be reading informational text. You can be reading it in your science and social studies classes, as always. Character education could be reading informational text. I mean, everybody can jump on board with reading informational text and meeting those standards. You know, I did not mention this at the beginning, but I want to take time to mention it now because this is a pre-recorded webinar. I realize you cannot stop and ask me any questions. But what I would love for you to do is, as you're doing this, if you have any questions, just open up a second screen with an email to my email address. It's just jessica@azcharters.org. And you can start typing out those questions for me. So it makes it feel maybe a little bit more like a live interactive, and then I can get back to you with answers to those questions, kind of as soon as I can. All right, so these are your new AZ Merit blueprints for literature. I will include the ones or the link to all of your new blueprints in the email that I'm going to send over to you. So you'll want to make sure you have these new updated ones downloaded, ready to roll and use when you look at your Galileo scores. All right, so to prepare for AZ Merit, we need to go ahead and take a look at your Galileo assessment data. We're going to need to compare the standards that you're thinking about reteaching to the blueprint, making sure that they're falling into the buckets where you really need to be working with your students. We need a reteach calendar. You need to think about how are you going to plot these out for the rest of your time. And then we need to plan reteach. Those are kind of your 4 steps. All right. So you guys probably know how to do this, but I always like to include the reminder of how to get to some of the Galileo reports. So once you log into Galileo, and if you cannot remember the website, it is ati-online.com. You're going to come up, and this will be kind of the icons from your home page. We're going to go ahead and we're going to click our dashboard button right here, and that will bring us over to a dashboard. Now, mine is a fake dashboard, so it doesn't even have CBAS data on it because this just has a math pretest from 2018. But in yours, the last thing that will be over here will be any quizzes that you have given recently in your class, and then your CBAS assessments will be here. Last time I was out, we talked about the need for you to prioritize the standards based on your data from your CBAS 2 assessment and to really start reteaching that way. If you did not do that, if you did not reteach after CBAS 2 in like December or January, I guess I was out there in January to teach you, that is going to be your starting point for planning your reteach. Right now, all we're trying to do is identify the standards that need to be retaught and prioritize those standards. And so the very first thing that I'm going to lead you to is under this risk group counts. If you happen to show up to your homepage and it is on the calendar screen, don't forget the report screen will bring you over to where I just was. All right, here is this first report we need to look at. It's View Instruction Performance Tracker for all risk levels, and it's located under your bar graph. So this is going to give you the standards that Galileo considers based on your last benchmark test to be your most bang for your buck standards. This is where we're going to have to diverge a little bit for the 2 groups of folks. Because some of you, last time I was out here, you really dove in, you grabbed the standards that you wanted to reteach, and you are now done reteaching those standards, and you have new data because you've assessed it. So let me talk first if you have not done anything. So this is going to be teachers who are new since I was down there in January, or folks who did not reteach the first time. If you did not do an original reteach, your job would be to start from the top of your high-risk category and think about reteaching down. The only thing that I would say is we typically tell folks to skip these standards that are the L in ELA because you can teach them everywhere. These are the conventions of standard English, so it's capitalization in this example. You should just be correcting capitalization at all times in the classroom and assessing it that way instead of necessarily spending an entire time reteaching. Although you could choose to do this in a center if you wanted to, and that would also be acceptable. So if I'm a teacher and I have not retaught anything, and this data is absolutely correct for me because I have not retaught anything since this was last published, I'm going to come down this list and I'm going to say no to this one, no to this one. But I'm going to note, use comma before coordinating conjunction and compound sentence. Great, we need to work on this skill. I could send home a worksheet about it, or I could take this and put it into my center, or I could just make sure in social studies that we're writing compound sentences and make sure I show them where the comma goes in that. This is my next big reteach then, RI8. And it says that my lowest students, my high-risk students, really need this RI8. And so I'm going to mark that for myself. I'm going to say, okay, RI8, I'm coming for you. We are going to do a reteach. I'm going to come down here and say, okay, commas and quotations from direct speech. All right, so they're not getting that one correct, but I'm not necessarily going to do a reteach on it. I might throw this in to citing text-based evidence for the RI8, because this really talks about quotations and direct speech, which they should be giving direct quotes to back up their explanations. And so that's how I might tie that together. Our next one down here is order adjectives in the sentence according to conventional patterns. This is one that I might actually consider taking some time to teach with your high EL population, because this is one that does not it does not lend itself naturally to being picked up until someone really shows it to you. And then it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But I know that a lot of adult English classes still have to practice this regularly, even for adults who have been living, in the US for a while. So I might suggest actually doing a little reteach around this one, even though it falls into these L standards. But our next big one that we would teach then is this RI2. And again, during this, while they're determining the main idea, they're going to cite text-based evidence, and that's going to tie in these commas and quotations. We're going to make sure that every time they write for us, they have correct capitalization. We'll probably build in some compound sentence stems for them so that we make sure they can practice that comma. But this is the big one we're focusing the content on. Now, if you are running centers in your group, the thing to note is that although RI8 is here for your lower group students, it is not in your moderate risk. And so you may choose to differentiate. This is a higher capacity skill. If you're a newer teacher, this might not be the thing for you. It's going to be more difficult to plan a variety of reteaches at different levels for students, instead of just keeping most of your students on the same reteach. If you're doing most of your students on the same reteach, I just want you to keep plugging along through these all the way down until you get to your on-course students. If you are really thinking, I think I can try some differentiated reteach, try 2 groups and put all your high-risk kids that you're working on these standards, and then put moderate risk and on-course together and look at those students together. I think that will be an easier way to do this. All right, so that was a whole lot of information, and that was really for folks who have not been doing or tracking their reteach. Now, I know some of you have been collecting data all the way along, so you're going to come to me and you're going to say, well, I already retaught RI8. I already did it. Okay, if you retaught RI8, and then the next question I ask you is, what is your data about how they're doing now? So in order to be able to gain that data, you're actually going to have to come back to your main page and come over here and look and see how your students did on this assessment. You're really going to need to think about, did they master it? Were there enough of them who, when I get into the intervention alert, passed this? All right, then you come down and you go to the next one, RI2. Same thing, did I reteach it? Did I reassess it? If you haven't reassessed your retaught standards yet, you don't have any data to show where your students are, I would recommend starting with that now. Now you can do it a couple of different ways. You could actually go in, and if you haven't been assessing your data, you could make one large Galileo test, something that would take your students maybe one whole class period, and you can put in questions from all of the standards that you have been reteaching. So basically everything on this list that you've been reteaching. And then you can have students go back in and take it. And then you will use that information from the intervention alert to plan which standards have the lowest mastery so that you know exactly where you're headed to in the future. Now, there's one other case that we have out there that might be present for you right now. What if you came in and after the last thing in January, you came and you retaught all of these, and at this point, all of your students have mastered all of your assessments for these. So you're kind of sitting here looking at me like, well, I mean, Jess, I don't know what you want me to reteach. I don't have anything left on my steps to standards mastery. Okay, you have a couple of options. The first option is you go back to this page, wherever your CBAS 2 is, the last major assessment you took of all of your standards, and you do an intervention alert, and you go run down the side with the totals and the numbers and determine what other standards had really low percentage mastery, and you start plugging away at those based on your blueprint, right? So you're probably going to head towards informational text unless your informational text is really strong and nobody's hitting any of the literature standards, and then you're going to head towards your literature standards. The second option that you have is actually, so you guys pay for the Galileo software. You pay for CBAS 3, even though it's not assigned to you. You could reach out to Frank or to Paul, or you guys have a testing coordinator, and I forget her name. And you guys could actually choose to take the CBAS 3 in your classroom. It won't be exactly the same predictability because you'll probably have to split it out over 2 class periods. But if you're thinking, you know what, I could use some fresh data on all of the standards to really help me, that's no extra cost to the school. And so you could have students take that assessment, and then you could use that fresh data to start all over again. Because once that CBAS 3 has been taken, these steps to standards mastery will update, and they will be new based on the new assessment. And so that's absolutely something that you could look into. All right. So the last thing that we talked about was classroom application. And so when we were planning this out, it was really important, since I wasn't going to be down there and in person with you guys, that we had a piece where you could kind of submit your plan to your administration so they could check out what you're planning on doing between today and AZ Merit. So here is what I have come up with. I made us a little Google form. The link is in your email. It does require your name and your email address, and please double check your email address because that is where I will be sending your PD certificate once you have submitted all of this. So those 2 things are required. We appreciate it. And then here are the questions that you really need to think about. The first one is just an overarching, based on what we've discussed today and what you know, why is it important for you to reteach standards to students? What's your main driving purpose between doing this? The second is, what ELA standards are you going to be reteaching between now and AZ Merit? And so this answer is going to be different for every single person. It might even be different between grade levels, because some classes may have mastered reading informational text 1 and some did not. And so here in this, what ELA standards are you teaching? You're just going to go ahead and list the standards that you're going to be reteaching. You can add to it the weeks that you think you're going to be reteaching, but it's a paragraph box, so it'll give you a ton of room to be able to answer that. If you are an ELA teacher only, then this is the only one that you have to fill out. However, if you teach math and ELA, then you have both of these to fill out. And then if you are a 4th grade teacher who teaches math, ELA, and tested science, and you have been tracking any science data, you also want to fill out your science standards that you're going to be reteaching. And so you can just go ahead and list those out. It's a great way, because you're off pacing guide now, when Frank is checking your lesson plans, he'll be able to come in here and see what standards you should be hitting during your reteach based on your goal for yourself, and he'll be able to give you feedback on your lesson plans accordingly. All right. And then we really want to think about how did you prioritize these standards? This is where you're going to write like a big paragraph explaining to your administration why you chose these and what is your data to support it. So you may say, you know what, I chose to listen to Jess and go give CBAS 3 in my classroom. I have current data and I just went off standards mastery on current data. That's how I prioritize these. It also prioritized to spell wrong. I'm so sorry about that. The next thing you might do is you might say, you know what, I've been reteaching and I have 4 standards that I retaught. I retaught those to only about 50% mastery. So I'm actually going to continue to run those standards along with writing, and I'm going to use all of that in centers. Then you want to talk about that. How do you know you have 50% passing? What's your low inference data? So really just supporting your decision. And that is the last thing that we have on that sheet for you. You guys have my email address right here. I gave it to you earlier in the presentation. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I would just absolutely love to be able to help you think through these things and think through your reteach. Thank you so much. Have a great day.